My name is Eliza, and I'm 38 years old. For the last 15 years, my home has been the heart of my family's Thanksgiving. It was more than just a meal. It was a sensory symphony, a legacy of warmth and love passed down to me by my grandmother, Eleanor. I can close my eyes and still conjure it. The rich aroma of roasting turkey mingling with the sweet spice of pumpkin pie. The sound of my son's laughter chasing my cousins through the house. The weight of my grandmother's heavy, handwritten recipe book in my hands. It was my purpose, my joy, my sacred duty. So when my parents called me on a cold November evening and said, "Let's skip Thanksgiving this year, Eliza. We need space," it felt like the very foundation of my world had cracked. The real shock, however, came the next morning, when I found them standing on my doorstep, shivering in the dawn chill, not with apologies, but with a desperate, entitled plea for a piece of the very world they had so carelessly told me to dismantle. They had no idea that their casual dismissal had forced me to open a time capsule, a wooden box my grandmother had left for me, and the letter hidden inside was about to rewrite every rule of our family, forever. If you're watching this from a place where family traditions are the threads that weave your life together, I would be honored to hear where you're from in the comments below. And please, hit that like and subscribe button to join our community and hear more true stories about the moments that break us and the incredible, unexpected strength we find in putting the pieces back together. Before that phone call, the one that drew a sharp, black line between my life before and my life after my existence, was a masterclass in multitasking, a carefully constructed Jenga tower of responsibilities. At the base was my incredible 2-year-old son, Leo, a boy with my grandmother's soulful eyes and an artist's heart. He was my world, the sun my universe orbited around. The middle layers were my freelance graphic design business, a precarious but rewarding venture I ran from a small desk crammed into the corner of our living room, often working late into the night after Leo was asleep. And at the very top, the delicate crowning piece, was my self-appointed role as the keeper of my grandmother's legacy. Grandma Eleanor wasn't just the family matriarch. She was our true north, our center of gravity. Her home was a sanctuary, a place where the scent of baking bread could soothe any trouble and a cup of her strong tea could solve any problem. Her Thanksgiving was legendary, a feast that cousins would drive hours for. When she passed away 5 years ago, in the quiet of her bedroom, she pressed her old, flour-dusted recipe book into my hands. Its pages were soft as cloth, stained with vanilla and butter from decades of love. It was more than a transfer of property. It was a coronation, a sacred trust. "It's your turn to keep the family warm, Eliza," she'd whispered, her voice a fragile thread. I clutched that book to my chest and promised her I would. And I tried. Lord, how I tried. But to understand what happened, you have to understand that in my family, there have always been two parallel, conflicting universes. I lived in the first one, a universe governed by the laws of physics, responsibility, planning, sacrifice, and the quiet, often thankless, work of keeping everything and everyone from spinning out of control. My younger sister, Chloe, lived in the second. Chloe's universe had no such laws. At 35, she wasn't a gentle breeze. She was a Category 5 hurricane of charisma, spontaneity, and breathtaking self-interest. She was, and always had been, the golden child. She could quit a prestigious job to find herself in Thailand, and our parents, David and Karen, would praise her bravery. She could rack up thousands in credit card debt on designer clothes, and they would quietly pay it off, calling it an investment in her happiness. Meanwhile, I had followed the rules. I got married young, had a child, and when my marriage crumbled under the weight of my ex-husband's infidelity, I was the one who had to navigate the messy, painful reality of divorce while building a career from scratch to support my son, Chloe lived a glamorous, untethered life in the city. She worked in art, a vague title that seemed to involve attending gallery openings and taking long lunches. She always had a new, fascinating story about a weekend trip to Montreal or a disastrous but hilarious date with a musician. My parents were her captivated audience. They didn't just tolerate her chaotic choices, they were mesmerized by them. My stability wasn't seen as a strength. It was a quiet reproach to their own unlived dreams. A boring, beige backdrop against which Chloe's vibrant colors could pop. This dynamic wasn't a secret. It was the constitution of our family, written in invisible ink on our birth certificates. I remember my 14th birthday. I had saved for 6 months from my babysitting job to buy a second-hand telescope. I was obsessed with astronomy. I spent that entire birthday evening in the backyard, patiently mapping constellations. Chloe, then 11, got bored after 5 minutes, went inside, and threw a tantrum because my boring party didn't have a DJ. My parents spent the next hour consoling her, ordering pizza, and putting on her favorite music. Later that night, my father came outside. He didn't look through the telescope. He just patted me on the shoulder and said, "Try to include your sister more, Eliza. It's hard for her when she's not the center of attention." Even my passion was reframed as a failure to manage my sister's feelings. This pattern of financial and emotional disparity only grew starker as we became adults. When my 10-year-old car finally died, leaving me stranded with Leo on the side of the highway, I called my dad for help. I asked for a small loan, just $2,000, to put towards a reliable used vehicle so I could safely get my son to school and myself to client meetings. He sighed, the sound heavy with reluctance. "Eliza, you need to learn to budget better," he lectured. "We can't just be bailing you out. We'll give you $500, but you need to figure out the rest." It's a lesson in financial responsibility. 2 months later, Chloe called them in a panic from Paris. Her wallet had been stolen, and she was going to miss a life-changing week-long seminar on pottery in the south of France. I later found out my father wired her $4,000 without a moment's hesitation. When I confronted him, he said, "It's different, Eliza. That's an experience. Your car is just a utility." The message was clear. My needs were mundane burdens. Her wants were vital investments in her dazzling life. The emotional support was just as imbalanced. During the darkest days of my divorce, when I felt like I was drowning in legal fees and loneliness, my mother's advice was, "Well, you need to be strong for Leo." There was no offer to watch him for a weekend so I could have a moment to breathe, no shoulder to cry on, just another expectation piled onto my already weary back. But when Chloe had a dramatic breakup with a man she'd been dating for 6 weeks, my mother drove 2 hours to the city to spend 3 days with her, cooking her meals and helping her heal. But the most glaring example, the one that set the stage for everything, was the Thanksgiving disaster 10 years ago. Grandma was still with us, but her hands were gnarled with arthritis, and she couldn't manage the marathon of cooking. In a rare burst of performative helpfulness, Chloe announced she would take care of everything. Her idea of care was to order a catered meal from a pretentious downtown restaurant. The food that arrived was an insult to the holiday. A deconstructed turkey roulade, a lavender and parsnip foam that was supposed to be mashed potatoes, and a bitter kale salad. As our family poked at the strange, cold food on their plates, a funereal silence fell over the dining room. But I had seen this coming. I knew my sister. I had spent the entire previous day in my own small kitchen, roasting a beautiful, traditional 18-pound turkey. I'd made 3 pounds of creamy, cheesy mashed potatoes, a huge pan of my grandmother's sausage and sage stuffing, and a vat of rich homemade gravy. I had done it all in secret. As they sat in stunned silence, I began quietly bringing the real food out from my kitchen. Relief washed over the room. Plates were filled, conversation started, and the holiday was saved. But as the evening ended, my father stood to make a toast. "To Chloe," he said, raising his glass, "for thinking outside the box and giving us all such a unique culinary experience tonight." The family applauded, and my mother beamed at her. My hours of labor, my foresight, my food that they were all happily digesting it was invisible. I wasn't a daughter. I was a failsafe, an unspoken insurance policy against the golden child's inevitable failures. After Grandma died, I inherited that role officially. Every November, my life became a blur of planning, shopping, and prepping for a perfect feast for 15. It was my tribute to her. They would all come. They would eat, and they would leave. I mistook their annual pilgrimage to my table for love. I mistook their reliance on me for respect. I believed that my tireless effort was the thread holding our family together. I had no idea that to them, I wasn't the thread. I was just the needle, a sharp, functional tool they were about to discard now that they felt the tapestry was complete. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in early November. Leo was asleep, and the house was quiet. I was curled up on the sofa, my grandmother's recipe book open in my lap, mapping out the cooking schedule. The familiar smell of old paper and vanilla extract always calmed me. When my phone lit up with Dad on the screen, I smiled. My first thought was that he was calling to confirm his annual duty of bringing the extra folding chairs from his garage. It was a small, simple task, but it was his one contribution, and it made me feel for a moment like we were a team. "Hi, Dad," I answered, a warmth in my voice. "Eliza." His tone was clipped, devoid of its usual casualness. "Your mother and I are on speaker. We need to talk to you." A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. This was their official business voice. My mother's voice joined his, thin and strained. "Listen, honey, we've been doing a lot of thinking, and we've made a decision. This year, well, we think we're going to skip Thanksgiving." I physically recoiled, the book nearly sliding off my lap. "Skip it? What do you mean? We can scale back if it's too much for people. We could do a potluck or—" I started offering solutions, my mind racing to fix a problem I didn't yet understand. "No, that's not it," my father interrupted, his impatience palpable. "We mean no dinner, no get-together, the whole thing. Chloe is going on a last-minute trip to Mexico with some friends, and your mother and I, to be perfectly honest, Eliza, we just want a quiet holiday. We're tired. We need space." Space. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. Space from what? From the tradition? Or from me? From their only grandson? I don't understand," I stammered, the cold feeling in my chest spreading to my limbs. "This is Grandma's tradition. It's the one day a year our whole family is guaranteed to be in the same room." I could hear the desperation in my own voice and hated it. "Well, traditions can change, Eliza," my mother said, her tone shifting from strained to patronizing. "People evolve. We've put in our 40 years of parenting. We have earned a break. As a single mother yourself, surely you can understand that." The comparison was a deliberate cruelty. It felt like a punch to the gut. They were equating their single day of being guests in my home to my 3, 6, 5 days a year reality of single motherhood. They were framing my desire to host them as a burden, a job from which they needed a vacation. I thought of the endless juggle of my life client deadlines, school projects, doctor's appointments, the constant, low-level hum of financial anxiety. When was my break scheduled? The call ended quickly after that. They offered platitudes about getting together soon and wished me a relaxing holiday. I hung up the phone, and the silence in the room was immense. My grandmother's recipe book lay open, her familiar cursive mocking me with recipes for a feast that would never happen. Tears finally began to fall, hot and bitter. They weren't just tears for a canceled dinner. They were tears for the brutal, undeniable truth that phone call had laid bare. In the architecture of my own family, my son and I were not a cornerstone. We were a decorative and apparently disposable piece of trim. I thought that was the worst of the pain, the rock bottom of disillusionment. But I was wrong. The storm was just gathering strength. In the immediate aftermath of the call, my primary mission was to shield Leo from the emotional shrapnel. I pasted on my bravest smile. "Guess what, buddy?" I announced the next morning over breakfast. "Big change of plans for Thanksgiving this year. It's going to be an exclusive VIP event, just you and me." I tried to inject as much excitement into my voice as I could. "We're going to build a massive pillow fort in the living room, watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, and eat pumpkin pie for breakfast, lunch, and dinner." Leo, who had inherited my grandmother's emotional intelligence, studied my face for a long moment. He knew this wasn't the whole story, but he also knew I wasn't ready to tell it. He just nodded and said, "Can we get extra whipped cream?" His quiet acceptance was both a comfort and a dagger to my heart. The silence from my family was absolute. Not a text, not a call to see how I'd taken the news. It was as if, having delivered their edict, they had simply wiped their hands clean of me. That silence was shattered on Saturday night, and the noise it made was far more damaging. I was idly scrolling through my phone, trying to numb my mind, when a new post from Chloe appeared. It was a photo of the three of them, Mom, Dad, and Chloe, clinking cocktail glasses at a ridiculously expensive-looking restaurant. They were all laughing, a carefree, picture-perfect image of familial bliss. Chloe's caption was a masterclass in passive aggression. "Early toast to the upcoming stress-free holiday with my favorite people. So proud of them for finally putting themselves first. You can't pour from an empty cup. Number family first. Number no drama. Number boundaries." No drama. Boundaries. My blood ran cold. They had co-opted the language of self-care to justify their selfishness. They had framed me as the drama, my desire for family connection as a violation of their boundaries. It was a dizzying, manipulative twist. The comments section was even worse. An acquaintance of Chloe's wrote, "Looks so relaxing. I bet it's a relief not to have to cook for an army this year, Karen." My mother herself had replied, "You have no idea, Susan. A total relief. We're finally getting our lives back." Getting their lives back. As if I was the one holding them captive. As if their only grandson was a prison sentence. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a thoughtless act. It was a coordinated, public celebration of our exclusion. I had to know if this was truly how they felt. I called my mother, my hand shaking. "Mom, I saw Chloe's post. And your comment. Is that what you think of Thanksgiving with us? That we're something you need to get your life back from?" A heavy sigh crackled through the phone. The familiar sound of her bracing herself for my oversensitivity. "Eliza, for heaven's sake, it's just social media. You take everything so literally. It's just how people talk." "Is it, Mom?" I pressed, my voice dangerously quiet. "Is calling me a toxic obligation just talk? Is telling your friends I'm a burden just talk? Well, if you must know." Her voice hardened, the pretense of patience gone. "It can be a lot. The house is always a mess with Leo's toys. You're always running around like a martyr, making everyone feel guilty if they don't praise your cooking enough. Honestly, it's exhausting. Maybe a year off will give you some perspective." The call ended. She had hung up on me. I stood there, phone in hand, her words echoing in the silent kitchen. Martyr. Guilty. Exhausting. They hadn't just rejected my dinner. They had rejected my entire being, my very nature as a caregiver. The next day, the narrative they were spinning became even clearer. My Aunt Carol, my dad's sister, called me. "Eliza, honey, I'm so sorry to hear you're not feeling up to hosting this year," she said, her voice full of genuine sympathy. "Your mom told me you were feeling completely overwhelmed and needed to cancel. Don't you worry, we all understand." I was stunned. They weren't just excluding me, they were lying to the rest of the family, painting me as the one who had canceled, the one who couldn't handle it. They were protecting their own image at the expense of mine. I corrected her gently, telling her the truth. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," Aunt Carol said finally. Her voice changed. "Oh, I see." The final, clarifying moment came when my best friend, Sarah, came over that night. She found me sitting in the dark, staring at a blank wall. I recounted the social media post, the phone call with my mother, the conversation with my aunt. I laid out the whole ugly story. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes. She looked at me, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that I couldn't yet muster for myself. "Eliza, listen to me," she said, taking both of my hands in hers. "This is not about you being sensitive. This is emotional manipulation. 101. They are gaslighting you. They have spent your entire life conditioning you to be the responsible one so they can be irresponsible. They relied on you to maintain this family, and now that they find it inconvenient, they are not just abandoning the tradition, they are trying to make it your fault. You are not the drama. Their selfishness is the drama." Hearing it from her, so plain and unvarnished, was like a switch being flipped in my brain. The fog of self-doubt and hurt began to clear, replaced by a slow-burning anger. She was right. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally reacting appropriately. As I sat there, the image of my grandmother's recipe book flashed in my mind. It was more than a book. It was a symbol of the love and effort they were so casually discarding. I thought my heart couldn't break any further, but I had no idea that my own sister was about to grind the final shards into dust. The final, irrevocable break came on Monday, just 3 days before Thanksgiving. I had spent the weekend in a determined cocoon of self-care with Leo. We went to the Science Museum, built a ridiculously complex Lego castle, and watched old comedies. I was building a new reality, one where our happiness didn't depend on their approval. I was beginning to feel a fragile sense of peace, a resignation that was starting to feel like acceptance. Then, my phone rang. The screen displayed Chloe's name, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey, sis." Her voice was a weaponized form of cheerfulness, dripping with a sweetness I knew to be false. "So, total disaster. My trip to Mexico got canceled. Some stupid hurricane in the Gulf. Mark and I are just going to be stuck here." "Oh, that's too bad," I said, my voice neutral. I refused to give her the emotional reaction she was likely fishing for. "Yeah, it's a real bummer," she sighed dramatically. "Anyway, since we're here, I was thinking. Mark, my new boyfriend, you haven't met him, he's a total foodie, and he's heard me rave for years about Grandma's legendary pumpkin pie. I told him I'd make it for him, as a special Thanksgiving treat since our vacation is ruined." I stayed silent, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I knew exactly where this was going. "So," she continued, the manufactured sweetness intensifying, "I was wondering if you could just do me a huge favor and text me the recipe? The one from her old book. It'll only take you a second. Just snap a pic." I closed my eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. This was the ultimate test. After everything they had done, after publicly humiliating me and lying to our family, she had the audacity to ask this. "I don't think so, Chloe," I said, the words coming out colder and harder than I intended. A short, sharp laugh came through the phone. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Eliza. It's a pie recipe, not the nuclear codes." You're not still sulking about the dinner, are you? Don't be so possessive. It is more than a recipe, I stated, my voice gaining strength. And I'm not being possessive. Grandma entrusted that book to me. The answer is no. The false cheer in Chloe's voice evaporated instantly, replaced by the familiar, venomous irritation I knew so well. Look, I don't have time for your little power trip. Mom and Dad were right about you. You always have to make everything a big, complicated drama. Just because you don't get to be the Thanksgiving queen this year doesn't give you the right to hoard every single thing Grandma ever touched. Grandma would have wanted me to have it to make my new boyfriend happy. Send me the damn recipe. The answer, I said, enunciating each word, is still no. Unbelievable, she spat. You are the most selfish person I know. You know what? Keep your stupid, dusty old book. I'll find a better recipe online. Honestly, it's probably overrated anyway. Have fun with your lonely, pathetic Thanksgiving for two. Maybe by next year you'll have learned how to be a decent human being. And then she hung up. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone buzzing. It was never about the recipe. It was about control. It was about her deep-seated belief that she was entitled to everything, including my most cherished possession, my connection to our grandmother. And her parting shot, lonely, pathetic Thanksgiving, was a poison dart, aimed with precision to inflict maximum pain. And it did. It hurt more than I could have imagined. But beneath the pain, something else ignited. A fire. The last vestiges of my desire to please them, to keep the peace, were burned away in that moment. Her cruelty provided a strange, terrible clarity. They didn't want space. They wanted my erasure. They wanted the warmth of family without providing any of the fuel. They wanted the legacy without the labor. In that moment of pure, cold fury, my gaze fell upon the top shelf of the pantry. And then, I remembered, not just a memory, but a vivid image. My grandmother, a few months before she passed, pressing a heavy, carved wooden box into my hands. "Don't open it unless you have to, my love," she had said, her eyes sad and wise. "But if they ever make you feel small, everything you need is in here." I had stored it away, thinking of it as a sentimental keepsake. Now I knew it was an arsenal. With a newfound sense of purpose, I retrieved the step stool from the utility closet. My hands were steady as I reached for the box. It was heavier than I remembered, made of dark, polished cedar. Dust motes danced in the single beam of afternoon light as I brought it down and placed it on the kitchen table. The engraved words on the lid seemed to glow with significance. "For Eliza, when you need it most." That time was now. I lifted the lid. The scent of old paper and cedar filled the air. Inside, it was a time capsule of my grandmother's foresight. There were no sentimental trinkets. This was a box of strategy. On top lay the original recipe book, its cover worn and soft from decades of use. Beneath it was a thick file folder, and on top of that, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my grandmother's elegant, looping cursive. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The letter was a direct message from the past, a voice of love and validation when I needed it most. "My dearest Eliza," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means the time has come that I always feared. You are facing a challenge, not from the world, but from within our own family. I hope with all my heart that I am wrong, that this letter gathers dust unopened forever. But I know my son David. I know his weakness and his pride. And I know your sister, Chloe. I have watched her shadow you your entire life, desperate for the light you generate so naturally. I love them, my darling, but my love has never blinded me to their flaws. Family is not meant to be a one-way street of sacrifice. It is a garden that requires tending from everyone. For too many years, you have been the only one watering the plants, pulling the weeds and turning the soil, while they have only shown up for the harvest. I am leaving you these things not as a memory, but as a defense. This is your protection. Inside this box, you will find my original recipe book. But what is more important are the legal documents. Several years ago, I met with an attorney. I had the entire collection, the book's concept, the family stories, and every single recipe, from the Thanksgiving turkey to the simplest shortbread cookie legally copyrighted. The paperwork in this folder will show that you, Eliza, are named as the sole, indisputable heir to that copyright. No one may reproduce, publish, or profit from this work without your written consent. Furthermore, I have used a portion of my life savings to establish a small trust in your name. You will find the details within. It is not a fortune, my dear, but it is a seed. It is enough to give you a choice, to help you publish this book yourself, and build something that is entirely your own, free from their shadows. Do not let them diminish you. Do not let them take your legacy and claim it as their own. That book is not just a collection of instructions. It is our history. It is our love made tangible. It is the very soul of our family's kitchen. You are its guardian now. Use these tools to build the independent, joyful life that you and my precious Leo so richly deserve. Do not ever be afraid to set a boundary. A locked door can feel like a fortress. Sometimes, that fortress is necessary to teach others the value of what lies inside. They will not appreciate the warmth until they have felt the cold. All my love, for all of time. Grandma, I was sobbing by the time I finished, but these were not tears of pain. They were tears of profound gratitude and release. My grandmother had seen me. She had truly, completely seen me. And she had armed me. I laid out the documents on the table. It was all there, just as she'd said. The official, sealed certificate of copyright from the U.S. Copyright Office. The detailed paperwork for a trust fund containing $25,000, managed by her longtime estate lawyer. It was a war chest. A plan, clear and sharp, crystallized in my mind. It was bolder than anything I had ever contemplated. The next morning, my first call was to Sarah. I explained about the box, the copyright, the trust. An hour later, I was sitting in her brother's law office. He examined the documents, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Your grandmother was a force of nature, wasn't she?" he said, a grin spreading across his face. "This is ironclad, watertight. Legally, you own every comma and every cup of flour in that book. They can't so much as post the pumpkin pie recipe on Facebook without your permission. You hold all the cards, Eliza." My next call was to my old college friend, Amelia, the editor at the cookbook publishing house. I didn't just send her a few recipes this time. I sent her a picture of the letter and the story of the canceled Thanksgiving. I poured my heart out. Her response came in less than 30 minutes. It was a single line, "Call me, now." When I did, her voice was electric with excitement. "Eliza, this isn't just a cookbook. This is a story the world needs to hear. A story about legacy, family, and a woman taking back her power. We don't just want to publish this, we want to champion it." Oh, by Wednesday evening, the day before Thanksgiving, my new reality was set. I had a formal meeting with the publisher scheduled for the following week. I had a lawyer on retainer, and I had a new plan for Thanksgiving dinner. I started making calls. Sarah was first. Then a few other close friends, the ones who had checked in on me after my divorce, the ones who celebrated my small victories and brought over soup when Leo was sick. "Change of plans," I told each of them. "Thanksgiving is at my place, but it's a friendsgiving. Bring your partners, bring your kids, just bring yourselves. The feast is on me." I spent the rest of the day in a whirlwind of joyful cooking. I wasn't just following recipes, I was channeling my grandmother's spirit. Every chop of an onion, every stir of a sauce, felt like an act of defiance and reclamation. As I pulled the magnificent golden brown turkey from the oven, I smiled a true, genuine smile. I was ready. I didn't know if my family would show up at my door, driven by guilt or habit, but I knew that if they did, they were about to meet a completely different woman. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and bright, and my home, for the first time in a long time, felt truly my own. It was filled with a different kind of energy, an energy not of obligation but of genuine celebration. By 10:30 a.m., the house was buzzing with life. My friends and their families had arrived, their arms laden with bottles of wine, bouquets of flowers, and side dishes to share. The air was thick with the scent of roasting turkey, savory herbs, and the sweet aroma of apple pie, all mingling with the sound of children's laughter echoing from the backyard. Leo was in his element, proudly showing his friends his Lego castle. This was what a holiday was supposed to feel like: joyful, effortless, and full of love. At precisely 11:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. The cheerful chatter in the house quieted for a beat. I glanced through the small glass pane in my front door and saw them. My father, my mother, and Chloe, huddled together on my porch like a small, miserable island. They looked utterly out of place. My father was shifting his weight from foot to foot, my mother was clutching her purse like a shield, and Chloe was wearing a thin, fashionable sundress that was completely inadequate for the biting New England wind. Her canceled Mexico trip was written all over her resentful expression. I took a deep, calming breath, my heart rate steady. I was not afraid. I was prepared. Sarah, sensing the moment, came to stand quietly beside me, a silent guardian. I opened the door. The shock on their faces was immediate and profound. They stared past me, their eyes widening at the sight of a house brimming with happy people, at the long dining table already laden with food, at the undeniable evidence of a celebration they were not a part of. Eliza, my mother, was the first to speak, her voice a weak, confused stammer. "What? What is all this?" "It's Thanksgiving, Mom," I said, my voice even and clear. "A day for gratitude. When one door closes, another one opens." "Oh," my father looked bewildered, as if his brain couldn't process the scene. "But you were supposed to be alone. You canceled." "Let me correct you, Dad," I said, stepping aside to let them into the entryway, but not further. I wanted them on my territory, but not integrated into my joy. "I didn't cancel anything. You canceled on me. You said you needed space, and I respected your wishes. So I made new plans. I decided to host a dinner for my chosen family, the people who show up, not just for the food, but for me." Chloe's lip curled into a familiar sneer. "Oh, I get it. This is a performance. A big revenge party to make us feel bad. How incredibly mature, Eliza." "No, Chloe, you don't get it," I replied, looking directly at her. My calmness seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. "This isn't revenge. This is acceptance. I have finally accepted the role you all assigned to me in this family, and now I am officially resigning from it." I led them into the living room, creating a small pocket of silence away from the main festivities. They stood awkwardly, a trio of ghosts at a feast. They were waiting for me to break, to cry, to invite them in. They were about to be disappointed. "So, what happened to Mexico?" I asked Chloe, my tone purely informational. She scowled, avoiding my gaze. "Weather cancellation. A freak hurricane. So we thought. What the heck? We were worried about you and Leo all alone. We thought we'd stop by, bring a pie." She gestured vaguely with the store-bought dessert in her hand. its plastic container looking cheap and sad in the warm light of my home. "That was thoughtful of you," I said, with no warmth. "But as you can see, we're far from alone, and we have plenty of pie. So tell me the real reason you're here." "Oh, Eliza, don't be like this," my mother pleaded, her voice taking on a whining edge. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. It's cold out, the house felt empty, and we started thinking about your turkey, about Grandma's traditions. We missed home." "That's fascinating," I said, letting a beat of silence hang in the air. "Because just last week, home and tradition were a toxic obligation you needed to get your lives back from." My mother's face went pale. My father looked down at his shoes. "Listen," my father said, stepping forward, trying to reclaim his patriarchal authority. "We messed up. We're saying we're sorry, okay? Can we please just drop this, have a piece of turkey, and salvage the holiday?" "No," I said. The single word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a gavel. "We can't. Because this was never just about one dinner. It was about decades of being taken for granted, of being the invisible support system for the Chloe show. And it's also about this." I walked over to the mahogany side table where I had arranged my arsenal. I picked up my grandmother's book. "Chloe, you wanted the recipe for this," I said, holding up the pie section. "You felt entitled to it. And you were right about one thing. I was hoarding it. I was hoarding it because it's mine. Legally and unequivocally." I placed the official copyright certificate on the table in front of them, then the trust documents. I watched as their eyes scanned the legal jargon, the official seals, the notarized signatures. I saw the precise moment the reality of the situation dawned on them. It was a slow-motion wave of shock, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. "Grandma," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. She wouldn't have." "Oh, she would have. And she did," I said, my voice filled with the pride I felt for my grandmother's fierce love. "She saw everything. She saw how you were treated like a star and I was treated like staff. So she left me not just a gift, but a shield. And she left me this." I picked up the letter. I didn't read all of it, just the most potent lines. "Do not let them take your legacy, Eliza. Do not be afraid to set boundaries, even if it means standing alone for a while. Sometimes it's the only way to make others see the value of what they have lost." The room was utterly still. For the first time in her 35 years, Chloe was speechless. My parents looked shrunken, defeated. The power dynamic of our entire lives had just been irrevocably shattered. "So, here are the new boundaries," I stated, my voice ringing with a clarity I had never felt before. "Grandma's legacy will be honored, and it will be shared, but on my terms, in my time. I'm publishing her cookbook. Her stories and her love will be shared with the world. But this version of our family, the one that runs on my silent labor and your casual disregard, is over. Any relationship we have from this day forward will be built on a foundation of earned respect. If you cannot provide that, there will be no relationship at all." I met each of their gazes. "I am truly sorry it has come to this, but there is no room for you at my table today. You told me you needed space. Now you have it." For a long, silent moment, they just stood there, processing the finality of my words. Then, without another word, my father turned, followed by my mother and a shell-shocked Chloe. I walked them to the door and closed it firmly behind them. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, taking a single, deep, shuddering breath. When I turned back to the party, a hush had fallen over the room. Every one of my friends was looking at me, not with pity, but with profound respect and admiration. Sarah rushed forward and enveloped me in a hug that said everything. I am so damn proud of you, she whispered into my ear. That Friendsgiving feast was transcendent. It was a celebration not just of a holiday, but of liberation. The house was filled with the kind of effortless joy I had always tried, and failed, to manufacture for my family. We ate until we were stuffed, shared stories, played board games, and laughed until our sides hurt. Leo was the happiest I had seen him in years, a bright, shining star in a constellation of people who genuinely cherished him. When the last guest had departed late that evening, leaving behind the pleasant, manageable mess of a successful party, I didn't feel the usual bone-deep exhaustion. I felt alive. I felt free. The weeks that followed were a period of profound and peaceful change. The silence from my family returned, but it was no longer a weapon used against me. It was a welcome, quiet, a space for healing and growth. My meeting with the publisher was a dream. They didn't just want a book. They wanted my book, my story. They offered me an advance that was substantial enough to allow me to step back from the relentless grind of freelance design and truly dedicate myself to the project. The validation was overwhelming. Leo and I embraced our new life as a team of two. We created our own traditions, small rituals that belonged only to us. We went ice skating on Friday nights at the local rink, laughing as we stumbled. We spent Sunday afternoons in the kitchen, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity, working our way through Grandma's book, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing spectacularly, but always doing it together. Our home, once a stage for their family drama, had transformed into our sanctuary. I heard snippets about their disastrous holiday season through my Aunt Carol, who called, mortified, after learning the truth. Without me as the designated organizer and emotional shock absorber, their Christmas had apparently imploded. Chloe had tried to host, but her lack of planning and short temper resulted in a burnt dinner and a screaming match with our father. They were finally experiencing the consequences of my absence. They had the space they had demanded, and now they were left to rattle around in the cold, empty expanse of it. I felt no triumph, no schadenfreude. I just felt a quiet, sad confirmation that I had done the right thing. My new dawn wasn't just on the horizon. I was living in it. 10 months after that life-altering Thanksgiving, my world had been completely remade. I was sitting in my cozy, sunlit home office, a space I had created for myself with part of the book advance. Outside the window, the tomato and basil plants Leo and I had planted in the spring were thriving in the late summer Sunday. On my laptop screen was the final, approved cover design for my cookbook, Grandma's Legacy, Recipes and Stories from My Family's Kitchen. It was beautiful, featuring a vintage photo of my grandmother, smiling, a wooden spoon in her hand. It was scheduled for a national release in October, perfectly timed for the holiday season. A year to the day after I had reclaimed my life, I would be sharing my grandmother's legacy with the world. The financial security from the book deal was life-changing. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the freedom it bought. The freedom to say no to draining freelance projects. The freedom to be fully present for my son. That summer, I took Leo on a trip to a small cabin on a lake in Maine for 2 weeks, our first real vacation, just the two of us. We swam, we kayaked, we told stories around a campfire. I watched him transform from a boy who walked on eggshells into a confident, carefree kid who belly-flopped into the water and laughed with his whole body. He was finally free to just be a child, without the weight of adult tensions on his small shoulders. His teachers had even commented on it at the end of the school year, noting his newfound confidence and participation in class. Justice, I learned, isn't always a dramatic courtroom-style verdict. Sometimes, it's the quiet, inevitable unfolding of consequences. Without me to act as the family's unpaid project manager, social director, and therapist, The dysfunctional dynamic between my parents and Chloe became unsustainable. Chloe, who had built her identity around being the free-spirited adventurer, found herself increasingly tethered. My parents, now in their late 60s, began to have minor health issues, and the responsibility of driving them to appointments and managing their care fell squarely on her. Their adoration for her exciting life curdled into a demanding dependency. The calls I used to get, "Can you pick up Dad's prescription? Can you help me figure out this new television?" were now all routed to her, and she was not equipped to handle them with grace. My mother began to reach out. The calls were tentative at first, filled with awkward small talk. She never offered a direct, grand apology, but in her own way, she was trying. She started asking about my life, not as a lead-in to a request, but with what sounded like genuine interest. "How is the book tour planning going? Leo seems so happy in the pictures you post." One sunny September afternoon, she showed up at my door unannounced, holding a small pot of mums. I cautiously invited her in. We sat in the kitchen, the same room where so many tense conversations had happened. Her eyes fell on my grandmother's book on the counter. "I miss her pot roast," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I tried to make it last week. From memory. It just wasn't right." I hesitated for a moment. Then a wave of compassion washed over me. "You forgot the fresh bay leaves and the pinch of nutmeg," I said gently. That was her secret. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She always said you were the one who got the heart of things. I didn't want to see it. I'm so sorry, Eliza. For everything." It was real. It was heartfelt. It was the apology I thought I'd never get. I nodded, accepting it. Not to erase the past, but to finally close that painful chapter. Our relationship would never go back to what it was, but perhaps we could build something new, something honest. I still haven't heard from Chloe, and my father communicates through my mother. He's too proud. Maybe one day that will change, or maybe it won't. But for the first time in my life, that's okay. My boundaries are my own. My happiness is my own. This Thanksgiving, my table will be full to bursting. It will be loud and messy and filled with love. And when we go around the table to say what we're grateful for, I will be grateful for my son, for my friends, for my newfound strength, and for the incredible woman who taught me that sometimes the most important family recipe is the one for self-respect. Looking back on the journey that brought me from a kitchen filled with obligation to this sun-drenched office of my own creation, I realized the greatest lesson my grandmother Eleanor left for me wasn't written on the yellowed, butter-stained pages of her recipe book. It was woven into the very fabric of her letter, in the quiet wisdom of her foresight. She taught me a fundamental truth I had spent a lifetime ignoring. That true family isn't something you are simply born into, like your eye color or your height. No. True family is a living structure, something that must be built and nurtured every single day with the bricks of mutual respect and the mortar of shared effort. It is not a monument to be silently worshipped, but a home that requires all its inhabitants to help patch the roof and keep the fire in the hearth from dying out. For years, I had been doing it all myself, acting as the mason, the roofer, and the firekeeper, while others were merely guests who stopped by to warm themselves. The deepest, and by far the most difficult, lesson was about boundaries. I used to think boundary was a cold word, a wall to push people away. I was wrong. I've come to understand that a boundary is not an act of aggression. It is a necessary and loving act of self-preservation. It isn't a wall to imprison yourself. It is a well-tended fence around the garden of your soul. That fence isn't there to block out the Sunday. It's there to keep the weeds of disrespect, entitlement, and casual disregard from choking out the fragile blossoms of your peace and self-worth. Setting those boundaries was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. When I closed the door on my parents and sister that Thanksgiving, the ensuing silence was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. For the first few weeks, a persistent voice in my head, a voice programmed by 38 years of being the good daughter and the responsible sister, whispered that I was selfish, that I was cruel, that I was destroying my family. The guilt was like a phantom limb, an ache where a connection used to be. I had to fight the instinct to call, to smooth things over, to slip back into my familiar role just to make the discomfort disappear. But then, a miraculous thing happened. The terrifying silence slowly transformed into a peaceful quiet. The emptiness I had feared they would leave in my life began to fill up, not with loneliness, but with myself. I started to hear my own voice for the first time, not muffled by the noise of their expectations. I discovered that I loved to paint in the mornings, that I despised the brand of coffee my mother always bought, that silence in a house doesn't mean you're alone, it means you're free. The fence I had built wasn't to push the world away, it was to create a safe enclosure where the real me could finally step out and breathe. And justice, I've learned, works in the most subtle of ways. It didn't arrive like a thunderclap, but like a slow, steady erosion. Without me as the organizational and emotional center of their universe, my family's gravity failed. My parents and Chloe were forced to contend with an unvarnished reality: each other. The first call from my mother came on a Tuesday afternoon about 3 months later. Her name flashed on my screen, and for the first time, I didn't feel a jolt of anxiety. I felt a deliberate calm. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Eliza?" she began, her voice weary. "I was just calling to ask. Do you remember what kind of flour Eleanor used for her gingerbread cookies? I tried making some for your father and they came out like rocks." End quote. The old me would have instantly recited the recipe, offered tips, probably even offered to bake a batch and bring them over. But the new me, the me protected by boundaries, did something different. "I'm not sure I remember off the top of my head, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I'm sure the recipe will be in my new cookbook coming out this fall. You can pre-order a copy." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I hadn't solved her problem. I hadn't rushed to fill her discomfort. I had gently redirected it back to me, to my work, to my life. "Oh," she said, her voice a little deflated. "Right. Well, how are you and Leo?" And that's how it began. Small, tentative conversations, where she was learning to engage with me as an individual, not as a utility. She started telling me little things. That Chloe had forgotten to take Dad to his dental appointment. That Chloe had complained about having to spend a Saturday helping them clean out the garage. For the first time, my mother was experiencing Chloe without the safety net of me. She was seeing her golden child in the unfiltered light of day, and it was clear she was struggling with what she saw. I never once said, "I told you so." I just listened. My silence, my neutrality, became a mirror, reflecting back to her the consequences of her own years of favoritism. It was a more powerful form of justice than any accusation I could have ever leveled. And Chloe, who had always craved freedom, was finally getting it, but it was an empty kind of freedom. Her friends, the ones drawn to her glamour and adventurous stories, weren't there to help her deal with our parents' leaky faucet or to listen to their litany of complaints. She, who had never been held accountable, was now shackled by the very obligations she had always scorned in me. She had her parents' attention, but it was the attention of dependency, not admiration. It was a gilded cage she had helped build herself. But the most important lessons weren't about them. They were about me. Through the process of writing the book, I did more than just transcribe recipes. I excavated my own history. I interviewed great aunts, heard stories about my grandmother as a young bride, learned of her struggles and her triumphs. I realized that the legacy she had left me wasn't just a book. It was a story of resilience, She had taught me that a woman's worth is not in her utility. It is not measured by the number of dishes she washes or the number of meals she serves. Our worth is inherent. It is in our wisdom, in our strength, in our ability to create joy from the simplest ingredients of life. For years, I mistakenly believed that making myself indispensable to my family would make me beloved. But I learned a harsh truth. When you make yourself indispensable, people don't love you more. They simply notice you less because you have become part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the electricity only noticed when it breaks down. The true legacy of my grandmother wasn't the recipes. It was the permission for me to stop being a utility and to start writing the recipe for my own life. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace from the people you love? What kind of fence did you have to build? And what did you discover was growing on the other side of it? I would be truly honored to hear your story in the comments below. It's in sharing these stories that we all feel a little less alone on these journeys. And if my story has touched you, if it has resonated with some part of your own journey, please take a moment to give this video a like and subscribe for more real-life lessons. Share it with someone in your life who might need to hear that they not only have the right to create their own traditions, but that they have the right to decide who is worthy of an invitation to their table. Thank you so much for listening. And please always remember, you don't just deserve a seat at the table, you deserve the right to decide who sits with you, and more importantly, you deserve to be the first one to choose the best chair for yourself.